In this lecture, we will continue with our if-else statements and even see another control structure that allows us to take decisions with our code. In the last lecture, we wrote an if-else statement using the comparison operator in order to have a true or false value that the if statement then could use to evaluate if the first or the second line of code should be evaluated. Now, there are other different operators that can return true or false values. So let's see one of them in action. So let's first define an age variable and set it to 16. And now we want something that tells us if the age is under 20, then John is a teenager, and if it's greater than 20, then John is a man. And the way we do it is like this. If age is less than 20, then console.log John is a teenager. And else console.log John is a man. So this works because this operator also returns a true or false value. And in this case, since the age is effectively less than 20, this will return true, and then this line of code gets executed. And here is John is a teenager. So the if part of the if-else statement got executed. Now if we change this to 25, for example, then we have this John is a man. So once again, last lecture we had the comparison operator which returned true or false, and now this time we used the last operator. We could also have used the greater operator, sees if the age is more or greater than 20. Or we could also have used the smaller or equal, which is this operator. So is smaller or equal than 20, then John is a teenager. And in this case, it would make more sense to have 19 actually, because if he's 20, then he's no longer a teenager, right? So this equal includes this last number basically. So if he's younger or equal than 19, then he's a teenager, and if he's not, then he's a man. Okay, but let's just leave it as it was. Now imagine that we wanted to say that if John is younger than 20, he's a teenager, like we already have. But we wanted to say also that if he's between 20 and 30, then he's a young man. And if he's older than 30, then he's just, let's say, older man. And in order to do that, we need something called Boolean Logic. So let's take a look at that right now. So Boolean Logic is something very important in computer science. And it's something that you will need to learn in order to master the if and else statements in JavaScript and in all other programming languages. So in a very broad sense, Boolean logic is a branch of computer science which deals with true and false values. And as I said, it's really something very important in coding. Now, there are several logical operators that deal with true and false values, but the most important ones are not and or operators, which are the ones that you already see here on this slide. So let's first take a look at the and the or operators. Here we have two tables called truth tables, which allow us to see the outcome of the operators. So the first truth table is for the and operator, and it works like this. Suppose we have two variables, a and b. Only if variable a and variable b are both true, the expression a and b will become true. In all other cases, the result will be false. And that's why it's called the AND operator, because A and B must be true. So if A or B is false, then A and B will become false in the end. And the same applies if more than two variables are in the game. So only if all variables are true, the AND expression will become true as well. Now the second truth table is the OR operator. And here things work differently. Because with the OR operator, it's enough that one of the variables to be true in order to make A or B come true. And it makes sense, right? That's because it's called the OR operator, because only A or B needs to be true. And the result will only be false if both variables are false. And once again, it works the same way with more than one variables. So it's enough for one variable to be true to make the final result be true as well. And then there's also the not operator, but that's a really simple one. All it does is to invert the true or false value of a variable. So if variable a is true, then not a is false. And if a is false, then not a is true. Easy, right? So let's just look at some examples right now to make it more clear. Alright, so we start by defining a variable called age. And that's the one that we've been working with actually. So age greater or equal than 20 is of course false, because 16 is less than 20. And that's really simple, right? That's just like the example that we've seen before. The next line is age less than 30, which is of course true. And then we have the not operator. So we know that age less than 30 is true, right? And we know that the not operator inverts the value. So not age less than 30 is of course false. So does that make sense? And now come the more difficult parts. So in the next expression, we already know that the first part, which is age greater or equal than 20, is false. And we also know that the age less than 30 is true. So here we have false and true. So can you guess the result? And that's right, it's false, because they are not both true, okay? Now the next expression is similar, but we have the or operator here. So it's now true or false. So what will the result be? Alright, now it's true. And that's because with the or operator, it's enough for one of them to be true. Okay, this may sound a little bit scary, but it's, as I said, it's really important, and it's actually easy when you see it in practice. So let's now do that. So as I said before taking a look at the Boolean logic, we want something here that says that John is a young man if he's between 20 and 30 years old. So what we can do here is to actually do something we didn't do before, which is to create a third else. Not here, but actually here. So else and then if again. So if this one is true, then execute this line. If not, so if this one is not true, but this expression is true, then execute this line. And if everything is false, then just execute the last line. Okay, so what we want to say here is that John should be between 20 and 30 years old. So how can we do this? So first, we need to tell JavaScript that he's older than 20. So age older than 20. But we also want him to be less than 30, right? So that he's between 20 and 30. So we want him to be older than 20 and younger than 30. So we use the AND operator that we just saw in the Boolean logic slide. Then 30. So in here we want to log console.log John is a young man. Okay, so let's just reload the page and see what happens. Okay, great. So John is 25 here, right? So what we get here is John is a young man. So let's examine this line by line. So the first condition here is age less than 20. And this is false, right? So we go to the next test here, which is this next else if. So this is false, so test the next one. So is the age greater than 20? Yes, it is, because it's 25. So this is true. And then, is the age less than 30? Yes, it is, because it's 25. So we have true and true. And remember, both parts have to be true in order for the total expression to be true as well. So true and true, in this case, is true. So what we'd have then is this line gets executed. And so in the console, we see John is a young man. So now let's see if he's 30, or let's even say 35, then John is a man. So again, this one is false, of course. Then age is greater than 20. This is true. All right, so this is still true. But then the other part, age is less than 30, this one is not true. So we have true and false. And so as we saw in the Boolean Logic slide, true and false, the final result is false. So this line does not get executed, and we jump here to the else statement. And so console log Jonas a man gets executed. Just add these missing semicolons here. Okay, so I hope this made sense to you. There's just one small thing missing here, so let me put 20 here, then what's going to happen? Yes, John is a man. Because in none of these cases we have the 20 included. So he's younger than 20 here, or he's older than 20, where there's no case where he is exactly 20. So what we should do here is what I showed you before actually, which is to have greater or equal to 20. So now if he's 20 or older, then this gets evaluated to true. So in this case, now we have John is a young man. Because this will be true and this will be true, so this line gets executed. And now finally, I just want to show you one more way of taking decisions in JavaScript, which is the switch statement. So imagine that we had a lot of different cases for one variable, then we could write a lot of if, else, if, else, if, else, if statements, but there's a simpler and more elegant way to do this, which is the switch statement. So let's take a look at how that works. So I will create a variable which is job, and this could of course be many different things. So I will say he's a teacher, and now I want to print different things according to his job. So we use the switch statement like this. So we say we want to switch the job, and then we do it like this. So the first case is teacher. And then we say, in this case, we want to console.log John teaches kids. And then we have to use something called the break statement. And I will just explain you in a second why that is necessary. So now imagine there's another case. Imagine that he is a driver, and then we want to print to the console that John drives a cab in Lisbon. Cool. So the break statement again, and then another case. Let's say that he is a cop. Then we want to log to the console that John helps fight crime. And break once again. And in the end we can add something similar to the else statement, which is the default. So we just write default, and then we just log John does something else. Alright, and that's it. So JavaScript will now look at each of these cases one by one and decide which one is the correct one. And we need this break here because in case that JavaScript decides that this is the correct case, then after this, then we need to break out and to finish this switch statement. So in order to do that, we need to break here. Because if we didn't have to break, then after that it would just continue to look at the other different cases, but we don't want that. So we want that as soon as we find the correct case, then we want to break out of the switch statement and finish it. So let's see the result of this. And alright, so John teaches kids. Great. Let me add something that we used before, which is a prompt. So we just say job prompt, what does John do? So now we can say this is a cop, for example, and then we see John helps fight crime, which is exactly this here corresponding to the cop. And if we reload this and say that he is a driver, then of course we see that John drives a cab in Lisbon. And finally we have the default one. So if we say that he's a designer, then we just see that John does something else, which is here the default case. So if none of the other one is true, so if none of these is the case, then we just say, okay, it's the default case, so John does something else. Alright, and that's it for this lecture. I think we're moving on at a great pace, which is really cool. You have already learned a lot of new stuff, and now it's time to put all of that to practice. So let's just move on to the next lecture, where I have the first coding challenge for you. So don't miss that and come with me right to the next lecture.